What's up, humans, and welcome to a new Psicoactivo. Happy Thursday, everybody. Okay, so today I have a new guest, somebody who I've been trying to get on the show for a little while. Times haven't been the best because I've been really hectic in everything that I've been doing in my life. But we managed to get a date for today. And this conversation, I think, is very important because of what the nature of the work that my guest does. He's the host of a podcast named Emergent, and he has multiple initiatives that I want to ask him about. The main topics that he treats is how humans are impacted by contact with non-human intelligence. And if you have been paying attention to this topic for decades, there's a lot of stories from people who claim to have had contact with non-human intelligence. And it gets dark and it gets light depending on who you talk to. It sometimes even gets sexual, depending on who you talk to. It's really varied, all those stories. So I do want to talk to Mr. Reed Summers. Welcome, Reed, to the show. How you doing, my man?
Hi, Pavel. Good to see you. Good to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess first, I would like to ask you about the nature of your work and the many initiatives that you have. If you indulge me, please.
Yeah, certainly. I've been kind of involved on the sidelines for most of my life in this topic, and we'll get into my family's experience and some of that background. Professionally, I've been involved since 2023. I think the hearings in Congress, Ryan Graves, David Frazier, David Grush, really initiated a sense of calling to get involved and to lend my mind, my voice to this issue, and really help the public think through what is a very confusing and enigmatic reality, seeing how much confusion is out there, and really the abandonment of logic and caution and kind of plausible lines of thinking. So I just found my way into the space, began posting a lot on X, began writing articles, began a book, and it all kind of emerged from there. So I started the Emergent Podcast last fall, just hit my 1 year mark, and it's been a great experience. Basically walking around the emergent new reality stemming from humanity's engagement and increasingly acknowledged engagement with non-human intelligence and the technologies that come with that. So basically looking at everything from what the tech transfer implies or means, what the biological transfer might imply or mean. Are there lines of influence? What do these incursions or interventions, whether it's at nuclear sites or even into the direct lives of experiencers, what does that imply? So Emergent is a platform really to explore this new reality stemming from engagement. With that, I launched Forerunner, a platform for those who want to kind of get out ahead of the discourse, be a part of the leading edge conversation on the implications of this presence, its activity and intent. Also on Forerunner, I have created a 20-part course on decoding intent. So it's open, it's free to everybody. I've had about 400 people take the course so far, and it really lays out a lot of my structured thinking, various frameworks, tools, models, heuristics that we can use to analyze the data we already have after 75 plus years of observations to gain early indications and a grounded assessment of intent, which is not a conclusion, just an assessment that can guide and better steer our efforts to collect data and to kind of iterate forward as we go. With those two efforts, I became a part of an organization, launching an organization called the Human Institute. And so the Human Institute is really tackling this at an institutional level, at the level of science, research, and policy, advocating for the formation of really completely new intergovernmental international initiatives to fill key gaps in the human capability set. When it comes to diplomatically engaging NHI, what are the protocols for ethical contact? What are the rules of engagement we need to have in place? And what are the key solutions we need to design that literally address absolute lack of capabilities in the UAP community as well, in terms of getting into the field and gaining new insight, new data on the phenomenon. So the Human Institute is working on a number of initiatives. One of them is called Investigating NHI. We just had our first lecture with Dr. Michael Safone of the Society for UAP Studies, talking about the scientific foundations for a new science of non-human intelligence. And I'm getting ready to host Dr. Gary Nolan on the series next, Dr. Beatrice Villarroyal, to basically carry forward this groundbreaking scientific investigation into NHI. We're also launching a platform called UFOevidence.com, which is going to be a world-class repository of the strongest evidence substantiating key aspects of the phenomenon, as well as a strength of evidence scoring system off of the strength of evidence systems used in criminology to assess the strength of cases related to physical, testimonial, and demonstrative evidence. So I think it's going to be a huge asset to the community in going from this kind of miasma, speculation, allegations, unsubstantiated claims, to really analyze what makes good evidence. And if the evidence is not very good today, okay, let's make it better. Let's go get what we need to substantiate this in the public. So I have a lot of plates in the oven, and I'm a super busy guy. And so pleasure to be here. And I love this is really what I live for, is the conversation. It's getting into the meat of it with intelligent people like yourself, Pavel, and your audience, and thinking this through together.
Thank you for saying that. That's really nice of you. Out of everything you said, though, I do have a little question about the website of evidence. Is it going to be open source, or because, you know, there are examples in the past, like, for example, Enigma, just to name one. Those guys got cozy with government entities, and the backlash they got was very significant. So how do you plan to mitigate that if, let's say, you're approached by a government entity?
Great question. And I know there are conversations at hand right now about working with the DoD or Aero, contracting with the government to do citizen-led research for the purposes of government. I think there are some real concerns, unanswered questions about those relationships, which we need to be considering. So UFOevidence.com is not taking evidence in from the public. It's taking accepted cases in UFO history and methodically scoring them with research grade methods. So we're not ingesting data from the public. We're actually going to give the methodology to the public as an open source tool. So people can go in and change the values, change the scoring system to a degree, rescore cases based on what they think matters most. And so it's very complex. It's extraordinarily elaborate, the system that's been built, but the public is going to have sandbox access to it. UFOevidence.com is also looking to partner with other data holding organizations to bring in their best cases, but it's not penciled to be the center of the data repository. It's really a presentation of evidence, methodically scored. The goal is to onboard the public and do so credibly and evidentially in a very media-rich way, a compelling way as well, and in a narrative-rich way. So there will be a brain trust working behind the site, some leading names in the field who can, again, help onboard the public and get them past these early barriers. Like, for example, there is no hard proof, right? Or it's all testimony, or abductions are all regressed under hypnosis. These kind of refrains or automatic assumptions, we've got to get the thinking public past some of these early hurdles because they're frankly just not true. Now, I do want to also mention another initiative that's underway. It's a conference that I've played a part in sponsoring. It's called the UAP Detection and Tracking Summit. It's next February 7th and 8th. And this summit is going to be really a first of its kind. It's going to bring together the UAP detection and tracking technology groups, the field research and academic groups, certain institutional leads, and leaders of international UAP science and technology organizations into one room to try to advance the field on behalf of the public interest. How can society generate its own insight into aerial phenomena? I think of the drone crisis, right? The public is craving credible insight. The government's not giving it. Society has the capabilities to generate answers today. We have to bring those groups together and then begin to talk about, yes, how do we co-locate data? How do we make it open source, researcher accessible? So these are huge questions I can't personally answer. There are groups forming right now parallel to the summit to discuss data, technology, instrumentation, calibration, Basically, how do we deliver credible, verified UAP sightings to the public, not just, grainy videos and iPhone footage, which of course is already circulating, some of which could be AI generated, right? So the risk of
Yeah.
disinformation and misinformation is just enormous. So we have the tools at the level of society, the private sector, and academia. They have to come together. And in my view, it has to be on a nonprofit, public interest basis that we act and move, not a for-profit.
Yeah, I agree there. And there seems to have been a sea change over the last few months. And I really like it that you're talking about citizen scientists, which is what is going to potentially lead the way. When this whole started in 2017, the whole government effort, I did have hopes for it, but not really high hopes for it. How do
Right.
you feel it's been since it all started, from that article until today? Because today there seems to be a little bit of fatigue. Wouldn't you agree?
I do. Absolutely. I mean, I've been advocating to take this conversation outside the national security space, the US centric space, put it in the international community, ground it in citizen response, citizen science, research, citizen experience. I think the citizen experiencers hold a better record of what the true encounter has been. And I think there's been a lot of false authority syndrome in that people are expecting the US DoD to tell them the nature of reality, right? To tell them who and what is in the world, how is it engaged. They're not built to do that, right? They are configured to lie, to defend national secrets, and to posture themselves in a position of superiority relative to their adversaries. So I think we really need to reframe the conversation. I do think the movement since 2017 has been important, potent, and effective. It's shifted the Overton window. We're having congressional hearings. We're having sitting heads of state and national security members, at least in this country, talking about UAP and the need to uncover their fundamental reality. I think that's extremely encouraging. But that's just going to get us to the 20-yard line. If we're gonna get a first down and take it past midfield, the society broadly has to be involved. And we already hear out of government that it's partly or largely because society is not prepared, whether it's ontologically, religiously, philosophically, etc., to deal with this, that they can't disclose. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's why we're here, is to get the public empowered, which is really my focus. My work is about citizen empowerment, citizen involvement. It's about process, not product. The process of inquiry, not the product of inquiry. It's about how to think, not what to think. But the key thing is that a growing number of people are involved in thinking and in the process. It's less about making conclusions today than intelligent assessments that shape the inquiry and get us to uncover the fundamentals of the phenomenon, to rule certain key variables in, versus to wander in a space of ever expanding possibilities. So I think yes, it has lost steam. It has possibly run its cycle. I know those were the words of retired Colonel Carl Nell. It's at the end of its cycle. I don't quite see it that way. I think maybe chapter 1 is over and chapter 2 needs to begin, and it could be a very different story.
Yeah. In terms of being ready, because I know that the majority of people in the world are not really paying too much attention yet to this. I know that the topic has been popular basically since the 60s, because like different cases, Betty and Barney Hill, Roswell also. But today it seems more still like a science fiction kind of topic for a lot of people. I can tell you, because I can extrapolate it to my family. The majority of them know what I do, but most of them think I'm just wasting my time. And what can we do, or what do you think needs to be done in order to make people understand that they need to be ready for something as monumental as this, which is contact?
Yeah, I think it's a multi-layered effort. It's got to involve many sectors of society, definitely academia. I am passionate about supporting the academic response to this phenomenon. There's false authority syndrome and appropriate authority syndrome, right? People do need authoritative individuals to tell them what is happening and what it means. So that is important. I I think I can tackle it at many different levels. So I think there is the potential for continued movement at the upper layer of authority, federal governments, private sector, and the intergovernmental space as well. There are conversations that could be had now in the EU, in the UN, in NATO, and that already have been happening. And at any point, those can corroborate the conversation more broadly. I see the federal intergovernmental as a corroborative conversation, right? We can't expect that to take care of the issue, right? The broad swath of the global community, AKA the citizens, have got to be thinking and speaking and moving in this direction for there to be any political cover for those elected leaders to tackle this, right, in the public limelight. So that's corroborative. I think academia is corroborative and also could be a driver. I think of Beatrice Villarreal's paper on, transients in the near Earth space environment, pre-Sputnik, pre-satellite age, right? Those are, if true, those are some revolutionary findings that are highly convincing.
Oh, yeah. That's
and,
an understatement.
Yeah, right. And I look forward to getting into that with her in my series. There's an evidentiary standard that people hold in different ways, right? So what does it take to convince? And who are we trying to convince? To what degree and to what end, right? So we have to really think about this act of proving something. And I think it will be stepwise. I think there are the corroborating and then there's the fundamental kind of central thrust. In my mind, one aspect of the central thrust is the credible UFO conversation. It's what we saw in Bill Maher with the coverage of the Age of Disclosure documentary, right? Yeah. Bill Maher was credibly covering this as a fundamental reality. It is verified by the US government to be real and other governments. They acknowledge UAP are real. Unexplained aerial phenomena are up there. Now we have the UAV, UAS crisis, these incursions of unmanned aerial vehicles and systems over cities, nuclear sites, military installations. I definitely see convergence there with the UAP reality. I think some aspect of that is UAP, but the same detection abilities for UAS may be some of the same for UAP. And I think there could be a political convergence, a willpower to investigate that supersedes the traditional UFO. With that, I think we need new data sets, right? So we have quite a data set already. We have 80 years of observations of UAP intelligent activity. So not just nuts and bolts, intelligent, intentful activity that engages human beings. So we have a lot of early data. We need to be scanning that methodically for signatures, signs, and indicators that we would then pursue further. We need to generate credible data regarding what is happening with experiencers that goes beyond the superficial layer of it felt good, it felt consciousness raising, right? That's not, I don't want to take anyone's experience away from them, but that cannot be the foundation of policy. Feel good cannot inform decision makers as to what to do. We already have in our pharmacopoeia drugs that can make anyone feel good, that can erase memory, that can alter memory, that can generate false sensations. So we have to go beyond just that kind of the superficial look at the experiencer side and really bring out the full spectrum of what's happened. Not least of which because for those who have had a not positive experience, it's extremely difficult to talk about that, right? The ridicule factor in the public, but also, whatever people claim that they're spouting, a threat narrative, right? Or that they're fearful or fear-based, that, they're acting primitively in response to some higher intelligence. There's so much intimidation of those who have not had good experiences. So I don't think we really know what's gone on there. But yes, I think we are closing chapter 1 of this story. And the question then is, what are the foundations of chapter 2? How does this continue to break through public consciousness? We shouldn't rule out the phenomenon doing it for us, right? Because it has say in how it is perceived. At any time, hypothetically, a communication could be inbound, could be detected and received. A craft could be sent inbound, right? And global attention would turn, and perception could be shaped by many different actors, human and non-human. So we are colossally ill-prepared to deal with the ramifications of the appearance of non-human tech, non-human communication, programmatic influence or attempts to shape narratives or perception, all of which could be underway. We are unprepared for any incursions into human genetics, human reproduction, right? The basic processes of human life, let alone other forms of life on Earth. So we have no frameworks to deal with this, and so we are vulnerable to whatever lies beyond, regardless of its intent. And I know, the organization that I'm working with, the Human Institute, is tackling that full on and front on.
Let me paint a scenario to you, because you spoke about genetics, and there was a recent interview, and there's a book called Project Preserve Destiny about Black by Dan Sherman. And he spoke to Jesse Michaels recently about that. And every single person that I've asked about this gentleman, they've told me that the operational sort of explanations of how the NSA works are spot on. So that startles me naturally, And I just want to know, the scenario is this. When I spoke to Joe Burrows, who's the airman from the Rendlesham Forest case, who had UAP injuries and has been suffering from heart problems due to that. He's the only military person with severance, sort of inability or disability, signed for by a senator. He's the only person in the world with that. When I asked
Harry
him
Reid,
about,
right?
Yeah, no, what's his name? The one who was prisoner of war. I don't remember his name. He passed away a couple of years ago.
Oh, yes.
He has a daughter.
Yes, I know exactly. The
Yeah.
name will come. It's one of the most famous names.
Yeah.
Political history. Okay. Yes. Right.
Yeah. I'm sorry for my brain fart. But
That's okay.
he spoke when I talked to him on my show. I asked him about the DNA, because that's one of the most pressing questions. If you are under study by people
McCain. Sorry, it was McCain, right?
Senator John McCain. That's it. Yeah. Like people like Kid Green or Dr. Gary Nolan are the ones dealing with people who have been injured. And when I asked him about the DNA, he told me something very cryptic that has kept me thinking since. He said that if he spoke about what he was told about his DNA, there would be some sort of societal disruption. And I asked him, can you be more specific? He said it would be sort of like an X-Men scenario. It's like the race wars that have been going on forever, but just add that new component of not everybody's fully human.
Right.
What
and
would you say
who
to
said this,
that?
Pavel? Who
John
did you?
Burroughs.
Okay, John Burroughs. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
And
I'm very familiar. With Richard Sherman's book.
That really startled me, though. My question is, how would you react with a scenario like that based on the work that you're doing?
I think there are potential signs that there have been genetic incursions undertaken, and I'm familiar with Sherman's book and Project Preserve Destiny. He made some pretty shocking statements and claims in that interview, not least of which was, I think Jesse Michaels kind of relayed that, okay, so the U.S. government gave permission for the NHI, for the Greys, to access the population, and Sherman corrected that. No, it was the other way around. Probably the U.S. government was given permission, right? So it gives you kind of some narrative anchors to kind of look back through history into the post-war, World War II era, 1950s, the alleged Greada Treaty, the Eisenhower era, quote, agreement that might have taken place, which, if true, is mind-blowing to imagine a scenario like that taking place in an Air Force hangar. I don't know if it was a real sit down or if it was mediated by intuitive communicators or psionics. I don't know how that would have happened if it did happen, but that an agreement took place down selects our notions of NHI from being non-intentful, non-biological, extra-dimensional, right, spiritual, religion, to being like, we're talking about physical, non-human, evolved entities who can communicate in the English language and who can interface with a federal government and influence it to take certain
boss
courses
us
of action.
around,
And can push us around potentially, right, with whatever forms of implicit or explicit intimidation, And so we are that if true, and of course, I would love greater confirmation of some of those allegations, that is a rapid and catastrophic down selection to a set of scenarios. I wouldn't say only one. I think there are several at play, but a pretty tightly bounded set of scenarios as to what the NHI presence is, what its potential intentions are. At least not when I say intent, people often think, oh, he's trying to decode their cognition or their consciousness. I'm actually not at all. I think that's impossible. We don't even understand our own consciousness. Intent for me is an assessment of the real human impacts of strategic and intelligent behavior. The origin of that behavior, the intelligence behind it, is not something we can probably at this point understand, but we must assess its intent in terms of the impacts on human life, human interests, and the human outcome, right? So we can get into this. This is my intent framework. It's driven off of a response versus, it's a response framework versus an understanding framework. So it's entertaining incomplete, inaccurate, potentially, possibly even deceptive information for the purpose of understanding how we should respond, versus a scientific attempt to understand them, which would probably take hundreds of years to fully understand them. But back to your question, Pavel, if there was a scenario that was confirmed officially that individuals were non-consensually engaged by human or non-human actors, were medically experimented upon, were genetically altered in some fashion, and that there are two different classes or three or four or five of living human beings, I think that is truly one of the hardest aspects of the phenomenon, if verified. And now we would understand why disclosure has not happened, right? So part of the solution there, and this is part of the problem. The current center of controversy over disclosure is upon U.S. Department of Defense, defense industry, private party, private sector, U.S., defense. It's all about us and our leaders misbehaving, committing crimes, being, quote, malfeasant or even evil. As long as that's the framing, that it's human bad, and then there's this kind of tacit ET good, right? They're the hypersentience that, is waiting to reveal itself to us, if only the evil government would get out of the way. As long as we have that default kind of framing of the issue, it makes it almost impossible to disclose some of the, quote, harder aspects, which multiple whistleblowers have spoken to, that there's a hard reality behind the phenomenon. So I think at a whole humanity level, to place the center of controversy on NHI, to make this not the saga of the U.S. government, making agreements against the better interests of humanity. I wouldn't be surprised if multiple governments have made agreements against the better interests of humanity, in part because there may have been trickery at play. There was technological asymmetry. There was the risk of, of technological surprise or sudden attack, what have you. There's many reasons why the government may have had their arm twisted into doing things that were not the right things to do. We have to place controversy there. And whatever the truth and reconciliation journey is, and it could be considerable, it has to have the right framing to succeed. And so if we're out on a witch hunt and we are the witches, right? And the phenomenon is either considered neutral or beneficial, as de facto, I think, we're not going to be able to penetrate the darker aspects of this.
But let's be real here, though, because, and I know you're real, but you made it sound a little bit, maybe I'm wrong, like humans don't have this negative aspect to them. And I mean, you just got to look at the state of the world right now and the historical fights that have taken place ever since the Abrahamic religions were created, right? So if I was non-human intelligence that is really advanced, first of all, let me ask you this. Do you think being evolved means necessarily being away from this violent and more instinctive sort of behavior that humans have? Or do you not think that it's related to that? Do you think that we can find hyper advanced species that are also hyper violent? Where do you stand on that first?
I mean, it's plausible to imagine, yes, to organize your society for interstellar travel, you would have to overcome some base primitive impulse, some basic violence. But there are hyper intelligent ways to undertake essentially violent activity. I mean, for example, transhumanism, if we were to take that down the road 100 or 1,000 years and basically re-engineer ourselves, play God, take out certain qualities, remove free will from an entity or its right to divine access, it's pretty violent, right? It doesn't mean it'll look violent because it's carried out over 1,000 years and it's mostly test tubes and injections and so forth. But there is an inherent violence to that, and so I wouldn't assume that life beyond Earth has just eclipsed all base impulse for control, to play God, right? To re-engineer self and others for selfish ends, for survival ends, right? And I just don't ascribe spiritual kind of or ethical maturation to technological ability. And so people would say, and I hear it all the time, I hear it from PhDs, I hear it from the smartest people in the room. Look, if they wanted us gone, we'd be gone. We're here, right? And so therefore, and I'm like, so therefore what? Right? There's 1,000 other ways to fundamentally alter us. Long game, covert, not overt, right? Genetic versus brute force. It's not bombs and bullets. This is how we anthropomorphize in intent, right? That if they're not doing what we would do to take over, then they're not taking over, right? Or they're not, and I think taking over is only one of several scenarios. I think transaction is another. I think integration is another. And so, but as long as we're only looking for the signatures of human blunt force, and we write off all these scenarios because, well, there's no overt hostility, we're really, blinding ourselves to a whole other set of hyper intelligent ways to meet your ends. And I take a naturalistic view of the universe, right? I think if these are entities that have evolved on other planetary bodies or have left their planetary bodies and continue their evolution in space, I think they would be under the same kind of pressures that would mandate the organization of societies, the development of technologies for survival, for replication, for continuance. And that is a fundamentally, potentially competitive environment still, right? Competing for whatever it's planetary access, biological resources, living space in an ecological perspective. And so to think that they've just eclipsed all that because they have, quote, free energy, I think is just wild assumptions, illogical leaps of faith that are, whether true or not necessary now. There's a more grounded approach to take in thinking through it.
Thank you for that, because I did have a lot of doubts pertaining the approach that you were taking, and now that you explain it like this, I completely understand more the way where you're coming from. And based on that, I do want to get into your background and your upbringing, because I just skimmed a little bit through your family, because I wanted you to tell me and tell the public, what did your father do in his career? What was he involved with when it comes to contact with non-human intelligence? And then we'll get into it a little bit more deeply. But first, we can start there. And how did you grow up surrounding that,
Yeah. Well, my father, you could call him a highly telepathic individual, a person who developed a strong kind of spiritual center and what he would describe as an ability to be in communication, to receive communication, and to work intuitively as guided by spirit in his work with others. He was a special educator for the blind, and he developed this very intuitive way of working with individuals with multiple highly impactful disabilities, neurological, sight, hearing, and so forth, mobility. And so this kind of spontaneous inner guidance began to arise in his work. And he ultimately then moved out of that field and into teaching what he called inner guidance, basically teaching people how to tap into this innate, you could call it a spiritual voice. Some might call it a spirit guide, something like that can guide you in your life and lead to spontaneous insight, and that leads to pretty profound outcomes. So Marshall taught inner guidance for some time, and then he had an escalation in this communication experience where what he would describe as probably a non-human intelligence of a non-physical kind, began to communicate to him directly and to communicate messages, I guess you would say, and some of them related to the reality of the interstellar environment around the Earth, the nature of who and what is in the world, and that was a shock to him. I was not even born at this point, so I didn't have the ability for shock, but I'm sure I would have. And it took him some years to kind of trust the veracity of the source of its message, to consent to the engagement. Ultimately, it demonstrated its intentions to him, and I think that's a very interesting process. I think that's something a lot of people are looking for right now: is how do you verify what is communicating to you? And we can talk about how he did it. I have some thoughts on how I might do it. Using kind of a
Please,
relational
if you
model.
can.
A
Yeah.
relational model, right? And so, I hosted this lecture last week by PhD philosopher of science Michael Safone, and I highly encourage people to go watch it. It's about the science of non-human intelligence, and it really places the scientific space within a relational domain versus a hard science, nuts and bolts, hard physical science domain. It presupposes that structured technological craft would only be created by an intelligence, right? And so that intelligence is really what we're interacting with. And so that's the center of controversy, where I would put it. And so how do you figure out another intelligence? Well, we have a fundamental human sensing of how to do that. And I think the relational model is the best. How are you approached? Is there acknowledgement of autonomy, your agency? Is there consent to engage? Is there enough to help you verify source and message? And kind of like, does it comport to the rules of life in terms of how a sentience should be accorded the right to free thought? Obviously access to the divine. I think that personally, I view that as very important.
Question.
And of course, people try to intervene in that access all the time, right? Within religions and the secular world to intercede. And so I think maintaining that, honoring that, is actually kind of a pillar of this relational engagement. Go ahead.
Is that not also anthropomorphizing it, what you're just describing to me?
Access to the spiritual?
No, the whole protocol that you're describing to me, is that not also anthropomorphizing contact?
I'm not, well, no, actually, absolutely not. It's not. Anthropomorphizing is to project onto a non-human a human value set. I'm actually projecting onto myself that human value set. I'm acting in my human interest. And I think we have to be very careful. We don't basically abandon our humanity because non-humans are here, embrace non-human sets of hypothetical morals and ethics because simply they can do what we can't in the skies and in the oceans. We have to act in a grounded fashion with our humanity. That's something I feel very strongly about, acting in the human interest, and cherishing the value of humanity in this intercultural, intercivilizational exchange that may be taking place, because there's no guarantees that we preserve anything. And that has nothing to do with malevolence at all. It has to do with nature. Nature shows what happens when two species collide. And it can be nothing else than natural incentives and evolutionary pressure that leads to either assimilation, die-off, things like that. And so preservation of human value, I think. So in that sense, and I think this is a great little space to sit for a second, because people often hear me use kind of core principles of human value in the context of NHI, and they think, oh, he's just writing on top of what can't be anything like us, things that are like us. And I appreciate we talk about that, because it's super important that we not. When I talk about decoding intent, assessing them, it is all for the purpose of informing an intelligent and unified human response. That to me is the project. The project is Project Human. It's not Project Non-Human. We are not capable of climbing into their consciousness and figuring them out, nor are they giving us permission to, right? And we might want to consider if we should give them permission to, because we seem to render ourselves wide and open with no caution and really no groundedness in this relational engagement. And so it's really about organizing and structuring our human response, identifying what makes us human, what makes humans valuable, what would we want to cherish, and what would we be willing to reconsider about what matters in life as a result of our engagement with non-human others. So the human project is really what I'm focused on. But back to Marshall and back to the communication experience. Yeah, it's okay. So, this happened in his life, and it was a massive struggle. And, in the end, Marshall developed a very strong sense of relationship with what was communicating to him. And I think, whatever it was, its message, its instruction, the way it gave him, the right to decide, the right to stay autonomous, I think a lot of that was at play that gave him a sense of trust. In the late 90s, this was years later, 15 years later, probably, Marshall suddenly was asked to receive a non-human communication from a physical non-human source, from an extraterrestrial non-human source. And that was a shock to him, because that he was not in the field of ufology. He was not looking at all of this. He was more of a spiritual teacher than anything. He more of a mystic. And so that was another threshold of shock, which is, okay, I need to receive a potential message from an extraterrestrial source. And what does that mean? And what will I have to go through for that? And how will I be perceived by others, etc.? All natural human responses. He relented, and he received what he would say are a series of messages from a physical non-human source in a position of observation that is not physically here, that is not engaging, but that would seek to advise regarding our relations and potential interactions with those who are here and have historically been here. And there is in those messages a degree of concern conveyed regarding the intentions of those entities, what their end game is, or what they're after. And so, that was, for me, how old was I at that point? Gosh, I was probably 10, 12, a little older, 13. So, I grew up in the context of that happening around me. And, Marshall was invited to give a keynote at MUFON one year. And I, kind of grew up walking the halls of UFO symposia and looking at everything from tarot cards to, pewter dragons and aura readings, and just the wild and the fringe of
Must have
everything.
Been fun, bro.
It was probably very fun. Yeah. I don't think back to that time all that fondly or all that often, but, yeah, I mean, it was eclectic, but I'm not really of that ilk. I'm, for me, like, what am I about? Okay, well, when I graduated from high school, day one, I left town. I went across the country, and within a few months, I was in the Middle East. And to the shock of my parents, my friends, everyone who knew me, I just went deep into the Middle East in the middle of the post 9/11, actually almost right after 9/11.
Why?
I had a sense of calling to get into the world, to figure out.
Did you go help people? Did you go to the military? What did you do?
Nope. I found a job teaching English as a 19-year-old buzz cut kid who had hardly left town and had been sitting in the back of the classroom for however many years, bored as hell. And now I found myself at the front of the classroom teaching executives, business leaders, engineers, English, business English, moreover, which is, it was by far the most challenging thing I could ever imagine doing at 19. And I was in the middle of the rural Middle East, not the urban.
Where the giants are. Just kidding.
Well, yes. In fact, because I was there when the war in Iraq broke out. And so the giants converged, right? The US, Great Britain. I was evacuated from where I was. There were military convoys rolling down the street in front of me. No one knew what the scope of that war would be. Would Iraq invade Turkey, which is where I was? I was in Eastern Turkey. Anyway, so I learned Turkish, got into languages, international relations, traveled 40 countries, spent the bulk of my early years in the world, in the belly of the beast, the grind of geopolitical tensions, intercultural tensions, interreligious tensions. And that's where I felt I needed to be, was in the thick of what was remaking my world, not back in the safety of, the cozy West, suffering from affluenza like all my high school friends.
Did you ever, were you ever in like really difficult, dangerous situations when you were there?
Yeah. I mean, I remember standing in front of the headquarters of Hezbollah in Beirut, looking at the
Whoa.
bombed out buildings. I was a journalism minor in college. So, but I was there for journalism, and somebody, told me, like, you better put your camera away right now and get the hell out of here, which I did. Right. But that was a moment. And there were moments like that. I wasn't in any overt war zones. I kept clear of putting myself in, ridiculous harm's way.
Smart.
Um, but I had this wild trust in humanity, that there was a fundamental goodness underlying it all. And I walked through Aleppo, Beirut, Iran, Tehran, all over Iran, with that kind of openness to my fellow human. And I had the most, what I didn't have was, I did not have a ton of highly dangerous moments. I had a few, but what I had was a massive collection of beautiful moments where people in hostile adversarial environments, chief enemies of the state, of my state, opened up to me, brought me into their homes, let me sleep on their couch. It just amazing moments of humanity. I also, because of my upbringing, I was aware and very awoke to the reality of non-human visitation, and that we were not alone in the universe. That made total sense to me. It made sense to me instinctually, intellectually, experientially, because of my family's experience. And so I struck up hundreds and hundreds of conversations, in the madrasas of Eastern Iran, on the streets of Islamabad and Lahore, in the slums of Beirut and Cairo, God, where else? In Syria. I had my most profound experiences, I would say, in Damascus, Syria, just talking about, what are we a part of? What is the cosmic picture? What if we had an encounter? And just gaining kind of an intercultural lens on how humanity would deal and contend with that realization. So that was a big kind of anchor in the ground for me, and for what I'm doing now, is really working on my sense of inspiration right now is to help humanity contend with the reality of encountering its environment, the ecosystem, the ecology of whatever's out there, which in my mind is a variety of intents, a variety of technological levels, spiritual levels of development, probably, and to do so while preserving its value and really cultivating its gift so that it can enact that in some larger community of life. That's my inspiration. Humanity is massively ill-equipped, and we see that, on the global stage all the time, even on the topic of exotechnologies, right? This global secret arms race for non-human tech, right? It is so explosive, so divisive, and so potentially dividing, that it has to be kept this secret, I suppose. Well, how do we work towards creating a scenario where it doesn't have to be kept secret, because we can handle it? So equipping us to handle it is really my passion there.
Question though about that. Do you think that it could be possible that some of this technology is so disruptive, like from the times of the atom bomb, that these scientists and these government entities are like convinced that we can't handle it because it's so disruptive that it would be even more destructive than potentially atom bombs or hydrogen bombs? Do you think that's a possibility? How do you view that?
I would say high chance it is very disruptive. I would say it would confer tremendous power, profit, and prestige to whoever markets it, writes the paper on it, stands up the university department on it, right? We are a world ill-equipped to deal with, whatever you want to call it, a grenade, or whatever's being technologically thrown in the sandbox, of our fighting
Mm.
world of toddler nations. So yeah, it's a huge problem. We ultimately have to work through that. I don't think we can rely upon any extraterrestrial non-human entity or presence, any federation, anything to steward us into that future. It is fundamental human agency and a coordinated human response that's needed. And I feel that very strongly. I'm not surprised this has been kept this secret, given some of the dimensions of the phenomena that I'm aware of. I'm not surprised at all. Getting society ready for that is a huge task. And mediating our deployment of non-human technologies, while it had to have been done in the 50s and 60s, I don't think it was. I think it is out of control. I think is way out of control. And so, I think controlled disclosure is a bit of a whimsical notion at this point, that you can slowly met this out. I think you can maybe control the early phases of the catastrophe. And I don't see it as a catastrophe, just to be clear. I see this as enormously beneficial. And I think we need to focus on the beneficials, which is mostly the unifying factor. I mean, what is Israel doing right now with Hamas? What is Russia doing with Ukraine right now? If there is a global programmatic incursion into the international community with potential lines of influence running in many different directions, we call it hazard, call it risk, call it threat, call it nature. I think all of them would be appropriate adjectives. But the regime that needs to be stood up to deal with it is as intergovernmental and collaborative as you can imagine. It's literally not possible to fight a land war against your neighbor and also deal with that. It literally is no longer an option. That's the blessing.
Yeah, in disguise. Yeah.
Blessing in disguise.
Going back a little bit to how your father's journey affected yours, because you were talking about going to the Middle East. How was it after that? And how, after that happened in the late 90s with your dad, what else happened?
Gosh, well, a ton happened. I went to college, got a degree. I worked with Marshall for some time. I helped him basically. I mean, he needed my help. It was a challenging thing to hold what he was holding. So that was really the first part. The first chapter of my engagement. Well, I wouldn't say the first. It was probably chapter 3 or 4. I'm now onto chapter 7 or 8, and I think it's turning really to what the world needs. That's was there for me from the beginning. I mean, that's why I went out into the world. Is what does the world need from me? That's the sense of calling. And to me, there's a spectrum of viable policies that we would entertain in response to some of the hard variables of the phenomenon. It's physicality, it's technology, it's intelligent and intentful, selective engagement with humanity, people, place, time. How do you devise a response plan to that? That's really my passion. And I guess, Marshall's work and my experience with my father is definitely a source of inspiration. It absolutely brought me into this field. But ultimately, it can't be about any one person's conclusion, in my opinion. And in fact, it's not even about my conclusion. I'm actually not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm trying to get them in the game. And so my conclusions or anyone else's really will not have much of an effect on the outcome. It's whether enough people get educated, get grounded in the data, use their full set of human capabilities, which, I teach in my course: logic, caution, responsibility, the gathering of evidence, intuition, instinct, right? If we do not bring the full set of capabilities to bear, we will deceive ourselves. We'll be deceived by any number of human actors, and in the competitive engagement. And by the way, even when entities collaborate, there is a competition, a down selection to role, to hierarchy, right? So I'm not saying it's all competition out there. Even symbiosis leads to fundamental adaptive alterations to all parties, right? But they're the technologically advanced party, and it rarely ends well for the less technologically advanced. So whatever the sum total outcome, we have to bring our full human capabilities to bear. And that's really my passion. I worked for 12 years, basically hosting science conferences for the National Center for Atmospheric Research. Basically just listened to nonstop climate science, and acted as a producer, an organizer, a coach to science presenters. I think that had a big impact in how I try to speak from logic, and I try to anchor into not speculation and theory, but grounded assessments that are formulated with data and evidence inside of the bounds of what we can know, not what we do know, but what we can know. And often people back away. We can't know anything. We don't have evidence. Show me the body. Without the body, nothing's real. Like that right there is so disempowering and disequipping. That's taking yourself out of the game. And I think a lot of people try to do that. That's what they actually want to do. They want to dismiss this, and they use the lack of proof to do it. Proof at the beginning is not the process of inquiry, right? I mean, you gather data, you look at facts, but you also have to look at unknown knowns, the assets that we already have that we just don't acknowledge that we have. And this is where the conversation, the dynamic that I'm trying to shift is there's this dynamic of going from facts to exploration, the known knowns to the unknown unknowns, right? So when we're dissatisfied with the facts we have, we go explore the possibility of everything. And then when that gets frustrating, because it is, we go back to the meager facts we have. There's two other quadrants in this picture, right? There's the unknown knowns, there's the assets we have that we don't know we have, and there are gems in the data set, the experiencer data set, the ufological data set. There are gems in the human knowledge base regarding species interaction, linguistics, semiotics, the way that systems interact dynamically. We have so much knowledge to bring to bear, and we're not. It's one thing I'm trying to change. And then we have the known unknowns. And that's one of the most important quadrants. Those are the questions. What do we know we don't know, but that we must rule in because of their considerable human and policy implications? Now, in that zone, I would say we have got to figure out the nature of the engagement taking place between alleged NHI in these non-consensual NHI-initiated encounters, abductions. We have got to figure out, is that real or not? What are the characteristics of the entity, the encounter, the state of mind of the human observer? If we don't figure that out and we wander in this, possibility parade of novel theories, we're self-obfuscating. We're really not going to advance our knowledge of what's happening.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about if you had any experiences yourself. Have you ever seen objects? Have you ever had any contact that you that may have steered you in a certain way, or positive, negative?
I definitely have had experiences, 100%. I mean, I have what I would say were likely UAP based on how they performed in the air. I mean, I'm not trained up on all the aspects of scientific observation. So, I mean, it was me standing on a deck looking at a craft or a light moving in very weird ways, seeming to disappear, seeming to go up out of the atmosphere very fast. So yes, nothing that was like watershed moment that said, oh my God, I have my world is rocked. And I respect that experience because I know people who have, and their world was never the same. So, not that for me. I do have definite memories growing up as a child of some of the activities circling around my father. I think, whatever happened with Marshall was not a neutral event. And so it brought very bizarre hitchhiker-like effects into our family, very bizarre psi-like effects that were highly disruptive, that I had to learn to live with and to navigate. And I wouldn't be surprised if that is not continuing to this day. I try to be pretty cued in to the psychic weather that surrounds me. I am definitely of the mind that we are participating unknowingly in a psychic space, an environment with literal force at play, forcings that alter the feel of things. And I think, what we do as humans has as much to do with that as NHI. I don't ascribe that all to NHI, but yeah, no, there's definitely been some challenging times and some challenging experiences.
What I want to ask you about, relating to your father, though, those contact experiences he had, I keep going back to Jean Keel and the concept that this phenomenon has been playing with human perception for millennia. And they
Mhm.
make you feel a certain way, they make you think a certain way, they make you see certain things according to the times as well. I go back also to that interview Jake Barber gave, which made a tremendous impact in a lot of people because he seems to have had this contact that made him feel. Um, he said that it made him feel unconditional love and like a
Mhm.
feminine presence. And then I saw Whitley Strieber, who is one of the most famous contactees in history, talking about how this could have been a deceit from non-human intelligence. So my
Mhm.
question is, how did your father, or how do you know that maybe your father wasn't being, in a sense, played or manipulated or made to think that everything was okay and that he was under control of
Great
everything?
question. Yeah. Yeah. We have to be asking those questions. I mean, if we're being engaged psychically, physically, we can't just believe. I think belief is insufficient across the board. And even if you believe you've had a great experience or you're in touch with entity XYZ from whatever star system, how will others be convinced of that? Like, what is the convincing power of I felt good, they said this, it seems right? So, it's a great question, and I invite you to reach out to Marshall. You can ask him yourself. He's the best person to tell his own story. But I know for him, what it boiled down to was a number of things. First, their message to him was plausible, meaning it didn't require a leap out of his own logic, an abandonment of his own logical position, right?
Mm.
Because if it does demand that, then it is demanding belief with no ability to verify. Not based on logic, not based on observation. It's the capabilities, right? And so anything that's asks you to step outside your frame of reality and just believe, red flag. Also, with that, what they said to him, he ultimately, as he became a better student of the phenomenon in how we could observe it, highly corroborated in his views what we know about the phenomenon. Its engagement with the civilian population, the agreements with potential government actors, across the board. There is just strong corroboration, and in his mind, when the message is one that helps form a hypothesis, but is not necessarily expecting itself to be, evidence, conclusion, call to action all at once. No, it's corroboration of what we can observe. That, I think, is a strengthening aspect as well, because again, it puts agency back in our hands. We are observers of our own reality, and so that their message corroborates that, another good sign. Also, in Marshall's case, these entities are not physically here. They're not asking for engagement. They're not asking for involvement in a federation, a galactic community of worlds. In terms of like an organized body that wants to bring Earth and humanity in. There's no, the ask was essentially use your own resources to figure out what's going on, unify in your own interest. Don't be the unwitting natives who get, who lose their native traditions, their native culture, and really their civilization in this exchange, and respond quickly on a quicker time frame than you are. So it's activating human agency, and it's putting power back in the hands of humanity. I think, power, action, plausibility, corroboration of observation. Those are four kind of cornerstones of how to vet a potential communication. And again, in my view, a communication goes as far as helping to form a hypothesis, right? It's not the solution. It's not what's going to tell everyone what's happening. It just won't work, right? And so if it can activate attention, attentiveness, if it can orient, And then with our own human assets, we go figure out what's going on the ground, in the air, in the sea. That I think is the right way to treat a potential, alert or message from beyond.
I gotta tell you, that does not sound like a contact with malevolent intent towards humans, the one your father had. I don't know
I
if you
agree.
agree.
I
Yeah.
do agree, and I mean it's respectful. It affirms human value. It does not denigrate humanity, which many of these messages do. They call us, a primitive race, a scourge, a virus, a primitive ape that needs to be prison planet contained. That we need to be brought into this federation. And if we do X, Y, Z, if we match all these requirements, then we'll be given access to technology, et cetera. And also, some of these messages, the communicating entity is almost taking on the clothing of the divine itself, almost painting themselves as a super sentience with super capabilities, and we can be like them, right? And to me, this looks like coercion, right? Coercing us into a hierarchical position relative to other entities so that we will believe. We will also allow them to ascribe themselves to our scriptures, to our human origins, that they were the gods, they were the angels. There's a ton of not only poor mental discipline, but really low utility thinking in the ancient contact narrative space, where we're basically writing NHI, the ones who are here now, into the annals of human origins, into the annals of religious origins. Now, I'm not saying that's impossible, that we should rule out that completely. I'm saying the risk and the low utility of doing so is a screaming red light on the dashboard. There is no reason to give whatever's here the right of planetary access, co-indigenous status, divine presence, right? That is not acting in the human interest, to say the least. And so in Marshall's case, with the messages he received, no, they do not do any of that. In fact, they do not insert themselves into the human origin or the human journey. It's basically an affirmation of indigenous rights, an attempt to activate indigenous response. I think that would be a good way to summarize it.
So does your gut tell you that this insertion of non-human entities in our distant past and in our scripture, do you think that was done intentionally to steer humanity a certain way? And do you think whatever is happening now is not correlated to that which happened in the distant past?
Well, let me kind of walk into it this way. So if I was an intelligent actor interested in Earth or humanity for whatever ends, maybe I view it as beneficial to myself and to them, but I want to steer this world of 7 billion unruly human beings with their 172 countries and their God knows how many conflicts and military alliances. Okay, how do I do this? Well, I look for power centers. Presumably, I'm an entity with a supply chain supporting my presence in the solar system, if this is extraterrestrial. And I do believe there is an extraterrestrial component. I'm not to say that's everything that's happening, but I think that's a component of what's happening. I want to basically generate maximum impact or effect with the minimum number of technological inputs. And so how do I get this species to do what I would like it to do? I look for human power centers. So I go to the various prime actors geopolitically: Russia, China, the United States, maybe the EU. Who knows? World War II, maybe it was Nazi Germany, maybe it was fascist Italy. And I make overtures. I attempt to psychically, if I'm able, communicate to them, to plant the seeds of thinking, of how we would partner, how we would engage, what we would receive from them. I would also go to the religions. I would try to influence religious leadership, because religion commands greater devotion and faithful activity than any government could, right? And if we were under observation for a period of time, which if I was that actor, I would spend some period of time observing, scoop up the data, pluck a few humans, definitely look at the full flora, fauna of Earth, understand, our full genetic makeup, what makes us tick, how we reproduce, everything. And I would basically engineer certain key triggers in that system, whether it's biological, genetic, neurological, psychological, that would cause thinking, perception to change, that leads to thinking, that leads to information being conveyed from one to many, that then triggers responses and actions that I would want. And so broadly speaking, I think that's a plausible scenario. Back to the question of religion, I don't know, to be honest, why there is such a proclivity to ascribe NHI to the ancient past. I don't doubt that there were probably encounters, visitations, but so I acknowledge the hypothesis, but I must limit the data set. So there is qualitative and quantitatively very poor data regarding ancient contact. Number, quality, it's a very noisy data set as well. It's through a religious lens often, and so it's artistically conveyed, religiously conveyed, which is not wrong. I understand that's exactly how things were conveyed. But to draw a hypothetical line of presence and intentions from 2,000 year ago cave art or biblical verses, or Renaissance paintings to what is here now, impossible. There's no possibility to verify that who's here now was what appeared in that painting maybe then. We have very low capability to analyze ancient data, right? So it's like, if it's on the cave wall, then it is. I mean, what more can you say? Now, any entity in the present could say that was us. And now, do we just believe that? How do we verify claims? And so there's really poor utility in anchoring our understanding of 2025, the ethics of contact today, on like literally ancient archaeology. And I don't see the utility in doing so. I see utility in verifying existence by acknowledging ancient presence. Like, look, it's not like this hasn't always potentially been around. But when we get to informing responses, the ancient data set is really problematic in my view. So I think we have a human tendency to do this. We want to look backward because it's easier. It doesn't presuppose action as much as exploration. I think it's ontologically the path of least resistance for people to think, oh yeah, 2,000 years ago, they're here. They've always been here. They're here now, they're here then. It's probably just it's just the background to human life. Like that's a very ontologically easy path in. Maybe strategically someone's trying to take that path. But I would counsel religious leaders, people with cultural authority, data holders to guard the gate. Like, don't just bring claims of NHI involvement with humanity right into our deepest, most foundational texts.
Yeah. And many of those texts that are the most ancient, only like a handful of people can accurately translate them. So that's really difficult. That makes it even more difficult. So yeah, I agree with you there. I do wonder though, what about the ancient Greek mythology, the ancient Roman mythology, the whole angels, archangels, demons dichotomy? How do you view that? Do you think there are multiple things happening? Like there's deities that are maybe interdimensional, and then there's also the ET presence? Or do you think it has been confused over time and meshed into something?
I think it is being confused in the present. I think, yes, there's definitely multiple things going on. It's almost like welcome to reality, where we're all of a sudden bursting, through the wall in the cave into a whole new chamber. And there's a lot of stuff going on in these new layers of reality. So are there non-physical, non-corporeal entities? I would say probably. Have they been engaging humanity now and in the past? Probably. Welcome to reality. Are there extraterrestrial visitations taking place for the purpose of sampling, observation? Who knows? Using the Earth for some purpose as a biological environment? Probably. Now and in the past? Probably. And if your goal is to expand into those possibilities, then for sure, do so. Expand. If your goal is to focus in on the urgent probabilities that we would then need to respond to, then buckle up, right? Because there has to be a transition from open aperture to narrowing the aperture to bring this picture into clear focus. in my mind, there are structured non-human technologies operating in the world that are having hard human impacts. They're impacting, military platforms. They're shutting down ships. They're causing planes to have electromagnetic failure in the sky.
Submarines
Possibly
too.
submarines. They're downing planes with directed energy weapons. In some cases, that's alleged. They are potentially engaging in altercations on the ground with civilian populations in remote rural areas. I think of the Colares incident. I think of what's happening in northern Brazil right now with laser-like injuries targeting people in places where we have almost no observing capabilities. Coincidence, right? It's like if you want to undertake something and you don't want us to know, then that's where you would do it. So I think there are some plausible lines to explore there. It's really the actionable present over the speculative past. Now, I think it's fine to speculate. It's fine to explore. But what is the prerogative here? Is it to entertain possibilities, or is it to be a part of the solution, which is devising a response plan for humanity? Now, at any time, any actor may not want us to be a part of that plan. They may want to take us out of the equation, either because we're not government, we're civilian, or we're American, not Chinese, or we're human and not non-human. And so if you want in the game, there's got to be some mental discipline and some structured thinking to walk through the phenomenon and to really rule in the fundamental variables that hold the highest consequence and the highest actionability. If there is an extraterrestrial presence, if it is acting with a detrimental intent now, not 100 years ago, today, that is the biggest event ever in the last 50 or 60 years, if not 100 years, maybe some would say ever. And that is a platform for action. And in my framework, I go from possibility to probability, probability to assessment, assessment to evidence collection, to conclusion, to position, action, and a unified response. That to me is the cognitive kind of rhetorical path to take, or the heuristic path to take. And yet we're largely not doing that. We're wandering around the speculative theory space. We're having fun, and the powers that be, human or non-human, are doing whatever they want. And now you could say, I don't care. That's a cynical position to take. I personally do care. That's been my journey, basically, as being a human who cares about the outcome. I feel I wake up in the morning and my North Star, or my what I align myself to, is that of being a humanitarian. I want to help humanity through what is happening. And what is now happening is now this. It's not just tension, geopolitical competition, great power struggle. It's our encounter with the non-human, not just its intelligence, but with its reality. And a reality means a likely complex dynamic exchange between intelligences, of technology, of resource, of agreement. And so we may find ourselves, this little island world. We've always imagined ourselves alone in the cosmos. It's just us and ourselves. Now we're encountering a continental reality with entities that have been interacting, collaborating, and competing for potentially God knows how many tens or hundreds of thousands of years. So, it's a wise up moment. And the fundamental work, it's the human project. It's getting our act together to navigate this responsibly.
Yeah. I have two final questions, and I'm going to let you go. The first one is about time, because something that has remained at the back of my mind whenever I'm investigating this are cases like the one of Dr. Michael Masters, and, for example, also Harold Malmgren. The final part of that interview with Jesse, where he's asked directly if he thinks some type of time element could be involved in all of this, and he said yes. Where do you stand on that? Because if it's also true, and we're dealing with multiple things, not just NHI, that is a major curveball into the whole scenario. How do you view that?
Yeah. I don't rule it out, for sure. Time dilation as a result of faster than light travel, some ability technologically, I would imagine, to to manipulate space-time, aka time, in some fashion. So I don't rule that out. I personally don't. I don't find a lot of reason to make the future humans hypothesis the central hypothesis. Um, that the gray alien being bipedal, X fingers, X eyes, it looks like us from the future. Sorry. Well, first off, the gray alien is not the only entity reported. There are a variety of morphologies reported. Biological convergence might explain bipedalism in planetary environments. There's a lot of possibilities at play there. I'm not an expert in that topic, but I do see in the testimonial record, characteristics of an evolved entity. And so to immediately think it's us, you could. The risk there, though, is when we talk about, well, we haven't really gotten there yet, but the ethics of engagement, the rules of engagement, a sovereign framework for which humanity engages with whatever's out there. If you make them us, day one, okay, we can take page 1 to page 501 of our sovereign framework and just dumpster that, right? Because they have human rights, right? They should have co-indigenous status. They can declare that they own land, that they can own territory on Earth, right? It's like giving them license to make any sort of claims over the Earth, over us, etc. And so, do we want to do that day one? That's a question. Likewise, with time traveling, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of theory at play that's yet to be scientifically fully validated there. And so I don't rule it out. I just say, in my view, a nature-based kind of first principles framework is the right one now to start with. And then we learn more and we iterate. Also, for the global public, if you want to get them involved in this, and I say this from having had thousands of, quote, what I call the UFO conversation, the credible ones, right? Where I introduce this topic to people, and after 10 or 50 or 60 minutes of listening to me, they're like, damn, this is real. I have to deal with this. I do not bring in time traveling aliens or time traveling humans or multidimensional entities that have manifested in my Bible or someone's Quran. I don't do that because it doesn't help. And it's simply unnecessary as a starting point. People are more schooled up on interplanetary science than ever before. We know more about the proclivity of life to form in hostile environments, which means most people think the universe has life, right? UAP are demonstrably technological, physical, detectable. Entities are being reported. There is a logical starting point in how we down select ultimately to the final conclusive statement about nature and origin. And that starting point to me is not extratemporality. It's not interdimensionality. I think the extraterrestrial hypothesis remains soundly the most logical initial interpretive kind of framework. It's what most government bodies that have studied this have concluded is probable globally. And so there's just a lot of grounds for kind of a collective sense of agreement about what we might be encountering. And then we figure out what we're really encountering. So I think it's a journey. The question is, what are the phases of the journey?
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we don't know yet exactly what it is. But yeah, there are a lot of like the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis, the USOs, the USO component. Those all need to be taken into account as well. Obviously, I don't want this to be our only conversation. I know you got to go. Yeah. And I do want to talk about the ethics in a future conversation because I think that's a topic that we need to cover extensively. So if that's okay with you, we can do a round 2 in the near future.
Sure.
And I want to thank you for your time. More importantly, thank you. And thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
You helped me understand you a little bit more, man, because I was a little bit confused. I heard a couple of things that you were probably talking about the threat narrative a little bit too much. And I don't think you are. I think you're talking about all the possibilities. Is that a correct assessment?
I know people throw that at me a lot, and I think it's a very reactive, pejorative at this point in the community. Oh, the threat narrative. It's like, hey, folks, welcome to life. Life has threats, right? I
Yeah.
mean, a coronal mass ejection is a threat. Lack of financial preparedness in your life is a potential threat. So, like threat blindedness, I might call out, or willful neglect of risk
Mm.
is also endemic in the community. And so, it's a risk aware, human centric narrative that I guess I'm telling. Centric in the sense of centric to our human interest.
Yeah.
There's really, I mean, we are what we are. This is the world we have. If you want to put forward a policy for human response, it has to preserve human life and interests. It has to be built on fundamental values for stability, security, and sovereignty, in my view. These are common denominators. If we choose non-common denominators, whether it's the Bible is the truth, and in the Bible it says, right, or aliens created XY civilization and they've been governing us all along, these are non-common denominational theories that will not lead anywhere. They are dwindling streams into the desert. The central course of the mainstream human response to this is the fact that we are dealing with a physical technological phenomenon of non-human origin that is potentially alien. And whenever you see this mentioned anywhere in the mainstream, do note they don't use the word NHI, they use the word alien. It would take tremendous force of community to overturn that. And so why overturn it? There is, I think, an alien component. It's not to say it explains it all, but it's a component. And so, yeah, I appreciate Pavel, and I look forward to getting into the ethics. There's a 9-part ethical framework that I present and I kind of go by. It informs an intent framework, a signature, a series of trust signatures and red flags regarding intent built off those ethics. And then we can start to talk about what is this coordinated international response? How would we respond to this?
Before my last question, I want to ask you, what do you got going on in the near future, and where can people find you?
Thank you. Yes, I have a ton going on, almost as more than I can handle. So Emergent, Reed Summers /podcast. I've got great guests coming on the show, government whistleblowers, scientists, leads of other UAP organizations, and basically just keeping this conversation hot and alive and not letting it devolve into a lower logical space, which it tends to want to do. Subscribe to the show, follow me there. I'm trying to get out more or less a conversation every 2 weeks. If you'd like to take my course on decoding intent, that's up on forerunner.reedsummers.com. It's free and open to everybody. I encourage you to get over there and also to continue this conversation with others who like to think these thoughts and go down these pathways of thinking. And I encourage you to follow the Human Institute, because that's where I'm putting a great bulk of my effort right now. I feel strong conviction that organization, its overall operational framework, and the partnerships it's forming will be impactful and will help really move the needle on this issue in some key ways. So, and I'm on X. I post there pretty frequently. I just also want to say it's, people often listen to me talk and they think, okay, it's all head, it's all logic, it's all reason. I'm an extremely spiritual person. I've been a spiritual practitioner my whole life. I'm a lifelong meditator. I do not discount the consciousness-based elements at all. I'm just out trying to get to the leading edge of where understanding meets action. What is the science of response? Because as I view it, we're 80 years in and we have done essentially nothing as a species coherently in response to this. And I see that as a problem. So the calling has taken me to those front lines, but believe me, I go way deeper than that. And, happy to get into, there's so many other alleyways and rabbit holes we could explore along the way. So
We'll
thank you,
have
Pavel,
time for
conversation.
everything, though. We'll have time. Last question. This comes from my friends at Living Life Consciously. What is your biggest hope for the future of humanity?
My biggest hope for the future of humanity is that we acknowledge, that we choose to be aware, that we are not alone and that we are being engaged, and that we turn to look back on ourselves in light of that. lest not so much that we look out there immediately for hope, for salvation, for excitement, but that we look back upon our world and use the full power of the acknowledgement of non-human intelligence to right the ship, to stand ourselves up on our own 2 feet as a coherent civilization, as a respectable species, and become participants in whatever community of life exists around us.
Fantastic, man. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope we can do this again soon.
For sure,
I'll
Pavel.
see you guys around. And thank you so much, Reed. Have a great rest of your day, okay?
Thank you. Will do. Appreciate it.
You know what to do, guys. Like and subscribe. Bye.